gained a lot of attention the last year. Manuel has been in the industry since 2000, having worked as both a developer, tester, release manager, and QA before he started consulting on DevOps in 2015. And as a consultant, Manuel has helped both small and large organizations in finance, legal, manufacturing, and software vendors, improving their software delivery in terms of metrics on quality, speed, and operability. So Manuel, we're very excited to hear from you. As well as further ado, the stage is yours.
Thank you very much, Sondre, and thanks for inviting me for this talk and this session. I think the work that Capra has been doing with Team Topologies is quite interesting, so we'll dig into that. First, I'll do an introduction to Team Topologies. So let's see if I can share my screen. Yes, that looks okay. Okay. By the way, I have Google Translate open, so you can, even if you write Norwegian in the chat, I probably can find out more or less what you're saying. So I'm just joking. I think you should be able to see my talk now.
Yes.
Okay. So this talk is called Product Teams Need a Family Too, and that was based on with the theme of family. I have 3 small boys, so it gets quite hectic at times at home, and there are some similarities, I would say, between seeing my kids growing up and seeing how dynamics in organizations also change. And when we look at teams who are enablers versus teams who are kind of delivering value, and teams that are growing their skills and their capabilities. So that's why the talk is about that. And so we're going to look at what do we expect in 2021 from product teams, and what are the difficulties with that, and what can we do about that. So Sondre mentioned the book Team Topologies came out in September 2019. It's been quite well accepted, and some people say it helps them structure the kind of next generation operating model now that everyone is going through digital transformation or something of the sort. So let's then dig into what exactly is a great product. Like, every organization wants to sell great services, great products. And one of the important aspects here that I'm sure it's nothing new to all of you, but actually, when we look back 10 years ago, 15 years ago, when I started in the industry, this was not at all kind of a common sense as it is today, that we need fully cross-functional teams to achieve great products and really meet the expectations of our customers. So it's been a journey, evolution. The demands from customers and users have changed, as well as the way that we organize and we think about how we can meet those demands. So John Cutler, I always recommend following him. He writes a lot about product development and teams and organization dynamics as well. So this kind of simple but powerful understanding that we need fully cross-functional teams, because first of all, we want to go fast because of competition, and because we want to experiment quickly and learn what works and what doesn't. And so we need to be able to take feedback very quickly from our customers, from our running systems, into the next iteration of the product. And like I was saying, this has a journey. We now have a lot more kind of research-based information. So I'm sure many of you are familiar with the book Accelerate, also from IT Revolution, which kind of is the followed up from the State of DevOps reports that are still coming out every year. So we actually have research, we have data showing that high-performing teams have to be cross-functional, and have the more kind of end-to-end ownership they have, the more likely they will be able to deliver the products that will help our customers. So one of the reasons, so if we want to have speed in delivery, then we need to avoid handovers if we can. So if we have many handovers, and so if we look back at kind of the more traditional waterfall type of development of products, where we had specialized teams and then handing over the work between them, it introduces delays, introduces problems with prioritization, with teams, becoming bottlenecks because they have too many demands for their functional knowledge. And so if we want fast flow, if we want speed and being able to adapt quickly, then this is going to be a problem. The more handovers you have in the kind of life cycle, the more difficult it's going to be. And so we see many organizations, again, in the last years, and more talking about end-to-end ownership. So I thought it was interesting, this example from BMW, where this was from a presentation they did. Their, I think was CTO did, talking about they're specifically trying to reduce handovers and trying to achieve more end-to-end ownership in teams. So this is a trend we see most organizations, or not most, but many organizations are looking into how can we achieve more teams with more ownership, with more autonomy, with less dependencies. And so we call this stream-aligned teams. You can call it product teams, but we felt like we needed kind of a broader definition, because product also starts to be blurry. Where does a product start and end in many cases as we get to more complex interdependent systems? But effectively, we're talking about reducing handovers by building teams with this sort of all the capabilities they need. And like I said before, that they can quickly learn from production, they can learn from the feedback from customers and iterate quickly over their service or product. This type of teams is what's going to allow great products to emerge, as John says. But of course, we're talking about, until now, a kind of an ideal state, and ideally most of our teams are streamlined, and that would be great. But then comes, reality kicks in, and I'm sure there's many difficulties to achieve that. And so Peter Newmark, already back in 2015, was saying, basically the elephant in the room, like one of the problems here is that these product teams or streamlined teams are going to need a lot of competences, and typically that's not so easy to achieve. It's not something that we don't have a magic wand that now suddenly is every team is an expert or has all the competences that they need. And so if we think about in particular software delivery teams or teams delivering digital products, we tend to expect that kind of the very least that they have this sort of capabilities around coding, architecture, testing, deployment. But again, this has changed over the years, right? So when we're talking about more cross-functional teams, we're also talking about understanding infrastructure, infrastructure as code. We need to understand our pipelines, what is CI/CD, what do we need to do, understanding the operational part. So if we're talking about being quick at taking feedback from our running systems, that means we need to be in charge of running our service or product and as a team. And so we need those kind of skills as well. And security, and we could go on and on for a lot more. But there's all these areas and competences we already mentioned, and if you look at it, we're still just focused on building the product right. So that means will work if we would know exactly what our customers need and what's going to basically bring value to the organization, which is not always the case, not usually the case, right? We need to experiment and find out what. That's why product development is so important as an area in all organizations. And so if we think about how do we know if we're building the right thing, then we need more competences. So again, if we want a single team to have end-to-end ownership and to have understanding and being able to experiment and get to that great product to emerge, then we need other things around metrics, understanding UX, understanding product viability, etc. And that's so we can build the right product as a team, not just that we execute on some expected promise of what is the right product, but that we actually are actively engaging with understanding what do we need to build, besides being able to build it in the right way. And so we have this fundamental kind of contrast between we want more autonomy in teams. Effectively, that's what we're talking about. And it's something that obviously Agile talked a lot about, having more autonomous teams that can decide more independently. But then there's all the competencies that they need, all the kind of the building blocks to enable autonomy. And that's where, I don't know, in my opinion, that's where Agile didn't bring a lot of answers, right? So it just was sort of kind of leaving this in the air, like, okay, teams should be more autonomous, but how do we do that if we need all these competences? So how do we alleviate this tension between we want more autonomy to increase flow, increase how quickly we respond, but if we don't have the competences, then we might actually cause the opposite, because teams might need to take shortcuts, they might compromise the quality of what they're delivering, and then that's going to cost more in the long run, etc. So how do we deal with this? And that's where the idea of we need a support system, right? The product teams need a sort of family of other teams. Effectively, it's the ecosystem of teams that's going to make this work. And what we're trying to achieve is effectively move away from hard team dependencies and based on handovers, as we saw earlier, where we're saying, well, this other team is responsible for testing, for example. So we just move the work to the other team and then wait until it's ready. Or, it can be anything. Infrastructure, it can be any kind of functional areas that we depend on other teams. We want to move away from that, right? We want to bring that competence inside the team. But how do we bridge the gaps that the team has today? So and those can be done with what I call soft dependencies, so based on capabilities. Yes, we depend on other teams to help us learn some skills. We depend on other teams to help us, to provide us some useful tools, useful services that make our life easier. But we're not sort of outsourcing, between quotes, part of the work in our products to other teams, right? And so these are the supporting teams that we talk about in the book: enabling teams, complicated subsystem, and platform teams. With this kind of clarity on different types of teams and how they relate to each other that we're going to look at, it also helps us have a better picture of what is our kind of organizational landscape, which teams exist, what are we trying to achieve today in the organization or part of the organization. And what I've seen in my experience is that often we rely simply on the names of the teams or the department that they belong to kind of guide our thinking about what is the organization doing as a whole, and that's leads to a lot of confusion and misunderstandings quite frequently. And so we think with this type of teams and the interactions between them that we're going to look at, that helps clarify, where are we as an organization? What are the things we need to improve? What are the things that are missing? So streamlined team is what I explained already, the sort of product teams, if you like, with that sort of end-to-end ownership. Ideally, we would be striving to have most of our teams in the organization be streamlined, because that means that we have a good understanding of how we're delivering, what is the value we're delivering to customers, and most teams are working on that. So that's sort of heartbeat, if you like, of the organization. But again, they are going to have to grow. We don't get high-performing teams, from one day to another. It's a journey, and so they're going to get messy at some points. Things are going to get messy. We need to be able to accept they're going to have some failures, some bumps on the road, and so at some they will be able also to to do amazing products and get to those benefits we're looking for, but we need to understand it can be a messy journey sometimes. And so we want to help these teams learn and grow, right, and become high-performing teams. So how do the other types of teams are going to help? So we need, or it's useful to talk about the idea of cognitive load. That we is one of the quite kind of fundamental ideas in the book in Team Topologies. So cognitive load was actually defined by John Sweller, a psychologist, as the total amount of mental effort being used in the working memory for an individual, right? But we can apply this to a team as a unit as well. And so more interestingly, there are different types of cognitive load. It's not that everything is the same or has the same role in our kind of work. So there is intrinsic cognitive load. So it's everything related to the skills that we need to do our job. So if we're thinking from a product and from a software development perspective, let's imagine we're talking about a team that develops Java-based banking software, for example, banking products. The intrinsic type of cognitive load would mean that we need to know how Java works, how do I program in Java, how do I test Java code, and a lot more things, obviously. Those are some of the fundamental kind of things. So if we don't have that knowledge, if we don't have those skills for whatever reason, maybe someone is a junior programmer or for whatever reason coming from another programming language, that's going to be taking up a lot of cognitive space, right, for those people. And so until they gain the skills and they become more advanced, this is going to take up their working memory. So it's kind of intrinsic generally relates to skills. There's extraneous cognitive load, which is everything that needs to happen for us to deliver value, in this case, to deliver a new version of our banking product or new feature. So all the tasks that need to happen for that to actually come true, for the customers to be able to use that new version. And so if I need to know about how do I deploy the application, or how do I access the test database, or how do I run the tests, anything that we need to do, or how do I create new infrastructure for this application, any of those kind of tasks are extraneous, in the sense that these are sort of the mechanics, the things that were going to get us to deliver the value, but they're not directly related to the business, to the customer problems, if you like. And that's where germane cognitive load comes in. That's when we're talking about everything that's around kind of the business domain. It's around the problems we're trying to solve and how we're solving them. And so, in this case, could be, we would have to know how bank transfers work, how bank accounts work, and a lot more things, obviously, depending on what is the domain. But these are the value add aspects, right? These are the things, the germane aspects is where we're actually providing, building, generating value for the customers and the organization. So once we have this distinction, then we can also, this helps us understand where should we be focusing, what types of cognitive load are we want to increase or minimize. So effectively, we want to minimize the intrinsic cognitive load. This can be through, training, mentoring, pair programming. We have code reviews, communities of practice. There are many ways in which we can help people upskill in the skills that they're lacking to have more experience to do their job. In terms of extraneous, obviously, it's also something we want to reduce, because these are not the tasks that are adding value to the product. These are tasks that we must do. And so we can reduce them through automation, obviously, but we need to be careful with tooling. But we need to be careful, because if we're just adding more tools, then that's actually increasing cognitive load to understand the tool, even if it helps us do some tasks faster. But basically, we want to minimize this too, so that we can leave more space for germane type of cognitive load, so that the team has to worry less about the mechanics, that they have the skills they need to do the job, so it's not taking up more of their cognitive capacity. And the reasons, or if you think about teams that have too high cognitive load, which is not just related to skills, but also how many responsibilities they have, how big are the products that they're responsible for, which is also another reason why the cognitive load can be too high. If they're struggling with dealing with everything that they need to know, or they should know, typically there's 4 key metrics from the Accelerate book that are strongly correlated to high-performing teams are going to be negatively affected, right? We won't be able to have shorter lead times and iterate faster because there's more that we need to know about. It's harder to deploy if we're deploying bigger pieces of software, and that we don't know how different parts of this service or product interact with each other. And it's going to be harder also to respond to problems and to restore when service is not working as expected, because there's a lot more in our heads. There's a lot more knowledge that we need and to do this more effectively. So all these key metrics tend to be negatively affected if teams have too high cognitive load. And so we come back to the idea that the other teams, the supporting type of teams, are going to reduce cognitive load on the streamlined teams predominantly. Can help other teams as well, obviously. And so we start with platform team, which are teams that provide abstractions for lower level services that the streamlined teams need. So that, again, we reduce the extraneous cognitive load and we let the streamlined teams focus on their business problems that they're trying to solve and customer problems, and not as much on all the kind of lower level things, which can be a broad number across different types of services. We tend to think more of the technical ones around things like infrastructure provisioning, monitoring, deployments, all these things, but it can be also more around what are some good kind of data APIs that make life easier for streamlined teams, even other types of platforms that we've seen coming up since the book was published. So effectively, we're providing some service to our teams. So I joke with this photo that's like feeding as a service to my kids. Fortunately, now only one of the 3 needs us to do that still. And so this platform, we should, when we do provide a definition in the book, that's the one from Evan Butcher. Because platform obviously is a kind of a broad term that has been used in many different ways and interpretations. So what we talk about is what Evan says here. So a digital platform as a foundation of self-service APIs, tools, services, knowledge, and support, which are arranged as a compelling internal product. And so there's a lot here to unpack. There are 3 key things that I want to stand out. First, the platforms should be self-service. So that means it's not based on requests, because if a platform team is just answering requests, then it's not actually helping increase the speed. Is again a sort of handover, right? So we're focusing on allowing other teams to self-serve their needs through APIs, tools, services, even just documentation and assets that are useful for them. But it's also the knowledge and support, right? We expect these platform teams to be sort of very knowledgeable around those domains that they're helping with. And so there's the idea that we have teams that are providing support to others, right? It's not just about building some technical service and saying, here you go, now just use it, which tends to be what I at least saw as platforms when I started working in IT, where just stuff that we build and then we make available to others, but we're not actually thinking about what is the experience of using these services. Is this really what teams need, or are we just building because we want to create some shared services? And so there's an ongoing relationship between platform teams and other teams. And finally, that last point of it needs to be a compelling internal product. So that definitely means that it's not something that we mandate on teams, because when we mandate and we force teams to use it, we don't know if this is going to increase their cognitive load. Even within the same organization, different teams are coming from different backgrounds, from different levels of experience. And so what might be very useful for one team from the platform might not actually help another team that is, doesn't have the kind of the understanding of what that service supposed to do. And so a good platform it should be treated as a product, something that we look at as, for internal customers, but we're looking at not just at the feature set, but actually, is this reliable? Is this usable? Fit for purpose? And so we're understanding the needs of our internal customers. We're not just, creating a big roadmap, a big plan to have, I don't know, a big Kubernetes-based platform with all the features, and without actually consulting with the teams and making this much more of a iterative development of the platform as a product. We want the product to make the right thing the easiest thing to do. And so that's also quite important principle for platform teams. If the platform provides an easy way to do things that minimizes cognitive load, there's no reason why streamlined teams won't use it, right? The problem is when we build stuff without taking that into consideration, and then we might actually be getting in the way of streamlined teams rather than helping them. Another type of team are enabling teams, which kind of orbit around streamlined teams. So these are usually a team of experts that help in some domain, so within a domain of expertise, which might be broader or narrower, depends what the organization needs. It might be enabling team for test automation, or enabling team for continuous delivery, which is already much kind of a broader topic. Can be enabling team for UX to help teams understand more about UX. Can be enabling team for product development. It doesn't have to be purely technical. And so these teams, they don't execute work. They exist to effectively upskill other teams, streamline teams, and reduce the learning curve effectively. Understand the streamline team, where they're coming from, what are the things that they need, and then do that on an ongoing basis over time. Because let's say with the example of test automation, a team that's new to test automation has problems and challenges that are very different from what they will have, the challenges they will have in 6 months later, 1 year later, when they already kind of mastered the basics and now they have other more advanced problems. So this should be a kind of, in general, ongoing activity from the enabling teams to upskill and help teams address the problems they have now, not kind of everything at the same time. So, like I said, kind of we expect enabling teams typically to be smallish teams of experts in some domain that provide sort of like almost a training wheels for the product teams or streamline teams to gain the necessary skills. They can help with not just teaching, mentoring, but also helping with selecting tools, doing a bit of kind of understanding what's coming ahead in the industry in terms of good practices, good useful tools, but always with a view of we need to meet our teams, the streamline teams, where they are now, not some kind of an idealized way where we just tell teams, oh, you should do this or you should do that, but actually working with them together through examples, through teaching with the teams to get them to solve the problems they have today. Another type of team that I left to the end because we see this more as an exception. We don't always, and in general, you don't expect to need complicated subsystem teams in most organizations. But there are some situations that some kind of niche problems and sometimes technology, but some areas of our products that require like PhD type of expertise or very niche expertise. So we might create a complicated subsystem team, for example, for face recognition subsystem or video processing or real-time high-performance trading subsystem. So parts of a bigger service that are so complicated in their nature that we actually need full-time team working on that, which doesn't mean they shouldn't be working on a product-focused approach, meaning they should understand who are their internal customers again, how do we prioritize the features for this complicated subsystem, etc. All that kind of agile approach should be applied in complicated subsystem teams. But effectively, we're taking away this cognitive load for this complicated part from the streamlined team that's going to use it, right? So it could be that we only have, it's not about sharing components, it's about the cognitive load. So it could be that we only have one complicated subsystem team that is providing for one streamlined team. It doesn't even have to be multiple streamlined teams using the same complicated subsystem, right? If it might be, we might just have one team, one product that uses this, but we need to abstract this complicated part. So we could go on and maybe in the Q&A, there might be questions about what makes complicated subsystem or not. There's been question that comes up often is machine learning complicated subsystem. That's what most organizations do, have a team of machine learning experts creating the models and so on. I think there are other ways, but if you're interested, we can talk about that in the Q&A. So like I said, in general, most organizations we don't expect are going to need complicated subsystems, or if you do, not more than one or two at most. But if we can avoid them, that's better, because this runs the risk of becoming a sort of traditional component team in the past, or a shared component team that becomes a bottleneck very, very easily, because if many teams depend on that team, then we start to get into prioritization problems and scheduling problems, etc. Like I said, there are some situations where we can't really avoid a complicated subsystem team. So I can this example, my 3-year-old, for him is too complicated to have shoes with shoelaces, right? So if we had that, if he had shoes with shoelaces, the parent says would be the complicated subsystem team to tie the shoelaces, sort of thing. And so I'm getting to the final part, but obviously the types of the teams help us understand and effectively align what is the expectations from different teams, what is their purpose, and what are the expected behaviors. So we go into more depth around that in the book and in our training, obviously. But even if we identify these types of teams, that's not enough, because the topology is actually the types and the interactions between them that are happening. So there are 3 core interaction modes we talk about: collaboration, acts as a service, and facilitating. And collaboration, as you might expect, we have 2 teams working together, but it's more specific than that, right? And there is sometimes a sort of, we call it a bit naive understanding of collaboration, that, well, if everyone just talks to everyone else, or every team talks to every other team, then everything will be fine, right? We'll be able to find the right solutions. And in fact, that is quite complicated. It will increase cognitive load. It will increase problems in teams prioritizing and focusing on what they need to do. And so what we're talking about here is collaboration is 2 teams working together for a specific period of time with a specific goal, with a specific purpose. So we should try to make that purpose as clear as possible before we start collaboration. So it might be that we need to, one team is going to provide some API-based service to another one, so we need to understand what that API needs to look like. Or I don't know, there is some feature that crosses 2 different products, or we need to kind of synchronize how this is going to work. And so whenever there's some sort of discovery that needs to happen, often can be between a streamline team and a platform team. For example, what do we need in a platform? We set up the expectation between the two teams, because it has a cost in terms of our effort and just the cognitive load, again, of working together with the other team. What are we trying to achieve, and how long do we expect is going to be needed? Do we think we need 2 weeks of working together every day to design this and test this API, or is it 1 day per week or a couple of hours per week? Whatever it is, but we set an expectation. It's not kind of open-ended. We set an expectation for how long this collaboration is going to happen, and we have a sort of, I call it sort of a test-driven approach, where this is the purpose of collaboration. Are we there yet or not? Therefore, the more specific the purpose is, the easier it's going to be to validate, are we done with the collaboration or not? Do we achieve the goal? And then the last one you see there, facilitating, is one team helps another. So this is a typical interaction mode for enabling teams, where they are facilitating the streamlined teams, helping them upskill, gain the knowledge, identify problems in their current approaches. And again, should have a estimated duration, and what is the purpose, specific purpose for this? Are we trying to learn how do we, automate an end-to-end test, or are we trying to select a good unit testing tool with the help of the enabling team? Whatever it is, but we try to set a specific goal. So when we put this kind of pieces together, like I was saying earlier, you start having this sort of organizational landscape view. Obviously, this would be a small part of the organization with 5 teams that you see here, but it gives us a picture of, there are 2 streamlined teams. We know what kind of service or product they're working on. There's complicated subsystem that's helping the streamlined teams. There's a platform, and there's enabling team. So it kind of provides us a snapshot. It's not a static model. It's not a sort of Spotify model, if you like. It's a moment in time where you take a snapshot and you say, this is what's happening. This is what we're trying to achieve. Maybe the streamlined team on top is being facilitated to learn more about test automation or continuous delivery. And so what we're trying to achieve is that, they have a first pipeline or something like that. And then you have the third interaction mode is acts as a service. This is typical for platform teams, where they're providing a service that other teams consume, right? Here, the difficulty is understanding when is a service ready to be acts as a service. So we're talking about effectively the same thing as infrastructure as a service. So if we're thinking about AWS or Google Cloud, we know that kind of the levels of documentation and support that they have for their services is very high, so that this can actually be consumed as a service. It's not something that we expect to interact directly with AWS engineers to know how a service works, right? So we can apply this idea internally in the organization, but we need to be careful. Not everything is acts as a service just because there's an API. Maybe it's not ready yet. Maybe we need to improve the usability and the understanding of this service until it's ready. But so for platform teams, they typically are either in collaboration mode for new features or improving service, or in acts as a service, where they're already providing a number of services for others to consume. But it can happen also between complicated subsystem, for example, and streamlined teams, as you see there. So these 3 interaction modes are not restricted to the types of teams. They can happen between any 2 teams, but in general, we see some types of teams tend to do more of facilitating in the case of enabling, or some other interaction mode. So I'm going to finish quickly. We believe, and we've seen, that if we use these 4 fundamental topologies and the 3 interaction modes, this is effectively what we need if we use it with care to build and run modern software systems, and obviously generate those great engaging products that we want to provide to our customers. So we covered, I'm getting to the end. So in Team Topologies, we cover a number of different aspects. So we talked a little bit about the fundamental topologies, team interaction modes. Obviously, there's a lot more that we need to think about for successful organization dynamics and evolution of teams. Things like how do we size the software according to the team capability, Conway's law, how do we avoid mismatches there, sensing, so this sort of evolutionary approach to the organization. So there's no kind of one-step transformation that's going to get us to the ideal design of our teams. It has to be an ongoing sensing approach. And things like thinnest viable platform. I mentioned briefly, we need to focus on what is really going to help our teams rather than build a huge platform that can do a lot of things, but they're not actually needed or understood. We're working on a workbook specific for remote teams. So it's taking some ideas from Team Topologies. So this should come out soon. I hope it will be a free PDF from IT Revolution. And we have a number of resources as well if you want to explore on teamtopologies.com, and also GitHub repositories. Those are more kind of assessments, templates, and some useful, simple techniques to do some of these things. And we have a newsletter if you're interested to hear about new industry examples or new material that we put out. So I think I more or less stayed within the allocated time, right? Sondre and Gustav. So thank you for listening, and I hope it's been useful.
Perfect. Thank you very much for the great talk, Manuel. I found it very interesting, and I also hope that everyone here learned something from this. And before I introduce the next speaker, I just wanted to quickly remind you all to ask questions in the chat. We already got some, which we'll bring up later after the following part of the event. But now it's my pleasure to introduce Aslak and Ørjan. Aslak is our CEO here at Capra, which is actually one of the few remaining titles we have, and he's also been at Capra for now more than 10 years. Ørjan is a senior consultant, and he's been at Capra for 6 years, and is currently working as a team leader at NRK. And now I will hand it over for you guys to talk a bit about how Capra is organized, and also hear Aslak's thoughts on being CEO in this transition.
Cool, thanks. I'll just start sharing my screen, blah, blah, blah. There we go. There we are. So that was the introductions on there, thank you. So Aslak and me, we are going to talk about this, how we in Capra used Team Topologies to radically redesign the organization. So since I've just got 10 minutes, I'll just do it pretty quickly. For those who are unsure who we are IT consultants. And this is our homepage. So visit there if you don't know who we are. But quick summary, we help our clients build the right software, and we are composed of IT advisors, programmers, architects, infrastructure experts, team and product managers. So to understand what and where we came from, I'm going to talk a little bit about the old Capra before we did the reorganization. The old organization was, we were pretty process and role oriented, meaning that we had individual persons assigned different roles. There were a lot of processes and procedures to follow when certain thing was happening. And then we also lacked clear coordination mechanism, and the team structures were ad hoc and revolved around individuals. We did have a couple of teams, but those were not always formalized, and often the teams were built around individuals maybe good at building teams, and they were not always at the right place at the right time. And then we had a board of directors and a management group, a little bit too big. We were 10 members of the management group at some point, I believe, and combined with being 100 employees, that was a bit too big. So we had the same organizational structure until this year as we did almost when we were 40 people. So we had some challenges figuring out how we should look like when we are supposed to grow to 140. So then we did a little bit changes, and the new Capra looks like this is the old Capra, by the way. The typical hierarchy with the board up here on the right, the management group, some support functions, HR, recruitment, sales, FAG, and delivery. So we made some changes last year, and now we look a little bit like the next diagram that I'm going to show you, the figure. I'm not going to deep dive into it. That's for another presentation, I guess. But now we look something like this, and you might recognize the color scheme that Manuel showed us. Here on the, if we start on the top left up here, we identified a value stream which goes from left to right. We do a lot of hiring and use a lot of energy and focus and time on hiring the right employees. So we have a couple of teams up here working on that. And then we have in the middle, we have build, competency, and business. We have talent, onboarding, team, front end, etc. And we have an operational team, a team COVID, working temporarily to help us get the right messages out to our employees. And then on the right, we have sell and deliver services to our clients. We have a team strategic partner client team, and we have other sales and delivery teams. And on the bottom, we have built a couple of teams to support the teams, like Manuel showed us. Team market, team strategy, and portfolio management, etc. And the main reason for this change was we trace back to 2019, where we identified 4 strategic challenges. One of them were organization. How can we adapt organization structure to increase our velocity and respond faster with improved quality? So out of that, our main goals were to create room for more employees to engage in operation and development of the company with the purpose of facilitate increased ownership and make better decisions. And then to increase the degree of autonomy and flexibility to make the company more robust and respond faster to change. So we wanted to go from somewhere over here to this kind of structure. We were not solely here on the typical command pyramid, but somewhere here in the middle. Like I said, that had some team structure, but a little bit ad hoc. But still, we had the management group on top, consisting of 10 people. And then in 2019, some of us in Capra read this book and thought for ourselves, maybe we should take our own medicine, try this on ourselves before we go to our clients trying to change their organization. Why not try it on ourselves first? So the book provided us with 4 fundamental team topologies, or team types for us. It provided us with 3 fundamental interaction modes. And then maybe also important, a common language that made it easier to communicate each other. It was important for us to have something to start with when we were figuring out how to build the company organizational structure. And then when we had this, we started working, and I'm not going to go into the details on how we did it, but this is one of the consequences. In a little bit before October, we cancelled or terminated our leadership group. So we're not having this top management group anymore. And we are steering and aligning our company with objectives and key results. So this is an overview from 2 teams working on this objective and these key results for the previous quarter, and another team working on this kind of objectives and key results. And all teams try to share their objectives and key results in one board. And we have the platform team of team strategy and portfolio management trying to facilitate out some goals and key results on company level. This has worked out quite fine so far. One of the feedbacks from one of the previous people who had a role, he said this, and I'm not going to translate. Må bare applaudere dere. Jeg hadde en forventning om at vi fikk gjort mer som et team enn hva vi gjorde som fagsjef, men at teamet tok til eierskap og initiativet så fort, er bare helt nydelig å se. So it kind of works. We also measure score in Capra, which is employee net promoter score. And since we started reorganizing back in January 2020, we have seen a quite big increase in the score and stabilize it's pretty high. Anything between 10 and 50 is considered a good score, and we're up here at 50. And also we're tracking alignment, how people in Capra feel about alignment, and it's also risen quite much, I would say, since January. If you want to read more about how we did it, I suggest you go and read a fantastic blog that Stein Otto has written at our homepage, and also there's some other snacks to listen to if you want. So Aslak, your turn.
Thank you. Yeah, my name is Aslak. I'm the CEO or daglig leder. We usually have a quite optimistic, if not naive, approach to most stuff that we do in Capra, but even we didn't think that this would be easy and go without any hitches. So we tried to envision what the major risks were going to be before we started this, and then to try to mitigate some of those risks. So I'm just going to quickly go through some of the major ones and then look at the outcome the way we see it today. And of course, this is not a work that's terminated or done, so it's an ongoing process. If we can go to the next slide. I've just tried to summarize some of the major risks, and I saw that there was a very good question popping up in the chat, which was, what are the biggest problems companies face? I can't speak for all companies, but these are some of the issues that we were a bit afraid of. Some of these are general risks related to organizational change, and some of these are maybe more related to the new governance model that we adopted. The first one being in any change in an organization, you have a management layer or management group who might resist this due to their loss of formal power. This is something that we looked at as a risk as well. I don't think you can avoid that in any organization, really. The next issue is related to how we spend our time. Being in a consultant company, we are there mostly for our customers when it comes to where we generate revenue and value. And of course, any big change internally will take time and focus away from delivering to these customers. We saw a quite big potential for the buildup of other decision-making processes that we couldn't see or couldn't control, and that would be a lot more non-transparent than the ones that we were trying to establish. Going from one management group to many teams had a risk of then the teams just going in the direction that they wanted and not being able to align around some agreed goals or objectives. And a more subtle one is that when we go from roles to teams, perhaps some people who see a role as the next step in their career or as a means to shine might find us less attractive, both people who already work here and for candidates from that we're trying to hire. So these were some out of many risks. And if we can go to the next slide, these are some of the things that we did. The first point is reflects our culture heavily about openness and running everything transparently and open. And the change process, the organizational design, and the implementation of this was run by a team that was not the old management group, and we thought that was quite important. The management group, of course, supported this and worked to with the team to implement it, but it was run by a different team. We did not try to do everything in a big bang. We tried to start with 1 or 2 teams and then learn how they did it and what we need to change when other teams were started. So we think that's quite important. And of course, we're not done yet. So some of the teams that you saw at the overview that Ørjan had are in the very early stage or have not even been completely started. So this will be an ongoing effort for quite some time. We have not forced anyone to be a part of a team, of course. That would be ironic when you look at a high level of autonomy. So the participation in all the teams is absolutely voluntary, and it's based on interest and not skill. So if you want to be part of a team doing marketing, then you do that. We don't filter based on what you've done before. The teams choose their own governance model. So it is perfectly okay to have teams that have team managers or team facilitators or have nothing at all. It's just a round robin. And it was important to us not to try to standardize on a governance model. The teams create and own their own budget, including their time. The team economy have facilitated this in order for us to be able to deliver on the overall economic objectives set by the board. But the teams spend the time and their money that they have on what they want, what they think are the most activities that will create the most value for the company. And Ørjan mentioned this as well. The teams are open and they show what they work on, how they work, and how they communicate, and everyone can participate on Slack channels and in meetings. So coming back to the interaction modes that you've talked about, Manuel, it's a heavy use of facilitating going on right now. We might be able to move on to more API thinking, and it's already established for some teams, but at least we know what's going on and we can see what other teams are working on. Ørjan mentioned the OKR model, which we have developed together. It's not something that management has decided on and then the others follow. This is something that we have agreed on in all the teams. And then we've tried to repeat and communicate repeatedly to the whole company about what we're trying to achieve and what we're doing and what the status is of this. And of course, this can never be enough, and it can never be said in enough different ways and interesting ways. But we're trying to hold all hands meetings and trying to update everyone in open channels on Slack as well. So finally, if we can go to the last slide. I think what we're seeing so far, Ørjan has already shown some numbers for. We're seeing increased engagement. We're seeing a lot more people are involved in the running and the developing of the company. We don't know yet if there are certain big differences between groups of people. For instance, people who are participating in teams and those who are not. This is something that we need to look into, but there is definitely a lot more people involved. And we see that the general activity level has gone up immensely. We do more at the same time, but of course it's very early on, and it's too early to tell if we will manage to keep moving in the same direction and not sort of drift apart over time. So that's something that we focus on. And finally, we see a high degree of interaction between teams, as I mentioned earlier. So we think that we are utilizing the new organization. On the other hand, we are battling some slow decision-making processes and the need to discuss everything that's going on. And that's something that we're working on. And I am also really proud of the fact that we have done this during COVID. In the middle of a pandemic, that we didn't pause or cancel the change, but we went on with it despite being locked at home. And so far the results are very, very good. So far, really proud of what we've been able to achieve, and really looking forward to the future. Sondre, over to you.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Ørjan and Aslak, for the insights, and I found it particularly interesting to hear your thoughts from this process, Aslak. Now I will hand it back to Manuel, who will provide some feedback on our implementation of the Team Topologies model. And this will be very interesting to hear your thoughts, because we have no idea what's coming. So over to you, Manuel.
Thank you. First of all, Aslak, you were just effectively illustrating real time how you stay the course with working from home with your daughter there. So that was cute. So you should be seeing my screen now. Yeah. So first of all, I wanted to say I quite surprised in a positive way that for a company to want to share so openly the changes they've been making internally, because usually it's easier to share much later when you can already tell, oh yes, we had a lot of successes, but it's not always so common to find the companies willing to share, these are challenges and problems that we're having as well. And also, like Sondre said, they wanted total transparency, so they haven't even seen the slides. So I hope you won't be, you won't regret it, but I don't think so. So I'm going to talk about 4 topics. I'm going to try to be quick. We can say it's some feedback, but it's not feedback saying this is good or bad, or good decision or bad decision. That's not for me to say. It's also not an in-depth analysis. It's from what I've heard from them. We had a call last week, and from the article that they published. What I want to try to do is highlight what are some useful questions that you might want to ask yourselves, at Capra, to understand if you're going in the right direction, or if you're achieving the benefit, right, of making these transformations. So you've already shown some of those. And so maybe I can highlight here some other aspects that maybe might be useful for you. So I want to start with the value streams that you mentioned in your presentation. So you said you have 3 value streams in the new organization. First of all, it's really great to have clarity on your value streams. Many organizations, they provide a lot of value to customers, but it's sort of in a spaghetti kind of way where they cannot really differentiate what are the different streams that actually provide the value to the clients. Things are kind of blurred, what are the actual streams of value. And so that makes it hard to strategize and think about where should we kind of invest, where should we place our bets, which value streams, if we don't even know what they are. So I think that's really good to have this clear definition. And so it's also good that we clarify what we mean by value stream. So the value stream is a set of actions that take place to add value to a customer from initial request through realization of value by the customer. So that's what Wikipedia says, and many people will agree with that. And it ends with the value stream always begins and ends with the customer. So that's kind of the part of the question I have here for Capra is, when we look at your value streams, there's clearly one that is external facing, right? Selling and delivering services to your clients, and there are two that are internal facing. And I think that's great to identify those internal value streams. We're providing value to the organization rather than directly to clients. And I would love to see more organizations understanding, building competencies as a value stream, for example. The questions I would ask about this are, how do you measure internal customer value, right? So if these value streams are internal, how do you decide if this is something we should invest or not? What is the value proposition for each stream? So that, to avoid that tendency that we're busy, we're doing a lot of things, but are these things really aligned to the value stream? And what I find is with internal customers, that becomes sometimes more difficult, because it's not so clear cut where is the boundary between the teams that are providing the value and the teams that are consuming the value internally. So again, this is quite like an open question to maybe as you move along, you can ask this question: do we actually understand why this value stream exists? What are we trying to achieve? And also then is, how do you know when you need to pivot, where you might say, because that's an interesting one with the hiring employees, because there's an expectation of growth, right? And you want to be always looking for finding good people, which makes a lot of sense. But what if, I don't know, what if, like I said, this is just asking questions, but if you have a consulting business where you have people with experience in software development in general, what if at some point it actually would make sense that we invest in becoming experts, let's say, in machine learning, and we focus our consultancy on machine learning? And do we know when that should happen, and what is the impact on that value stream of hiring employees? Because now you probably a number of things will need to change to get to that new positioning, right? And maybe you don't need to pivot. It's fine. The value stream is providing the value that you expect, and you're growing, and so on. And finally, the last question I would ask is, which might sound weird, but I'll explain. Does the value stream help teams say no? Meaning, is the value stream clear enough that the teams align to that value stream? No, can take a possible new piece of work or new project and say, does this align to the value stream? Is this actually going to help us get the value or not? So that we can say no when it doesn't. Because otherwise, if the value stream is not clear enough for us to be able to say, yes, it's a good fit or not a good fit, then we can be doing a lot of work and not actually providing as much value as we wanted. The next aspect is that you are applying topologies outside technology, which is something pretty new. So for us, me and Matthew, the other co-author, we expected the patterns and the principles we talk about in the book to apply more broadly than just in technology and delivery of kind of digital services. But because we didn't have the direct experience, we couldn't just state in the book, oh, yes, you can apply this elsewhere. But effectively, when we think about it, we always thought, some of these patterns are not specific to technology focused products. And so maybe in the future, we might even come out with maybe a new edition where we talk a bit about that. But when the book was published, we didn't have this. And so we start to see a few examples like Capra, I think, which are kind of more forward thinking and trying to apply this more broadly, the principles that make sense. So I'm not going into detail on all the teams that they have identified, but if we think, for example, I explained cognitive load, right, in the presentation. Let's think about, does this make sense for, let's say, a team of doing accounting? So I didn't use any of your teams because I didn't want to create confusion. But let's say there's an organization with a team accounting. Does it make sense to think about different types of cognitive load? Well, perhaps the intrinsic cognitive load for this team would be something like what are the, let's say, income tax retention brackets. I don't definitely not an expert in accounting, but there are things that accountants need to know and skills and knowledge they need to have, right? So if they wouldn't know this, they would be taking up some of their memory and some of their work. Maybe extraneous are things like, how do we submit tax forms to the IRS or the agency for taxes? Maybe germane is then more around, what are the projections for revenue for next quarter, or projections of costs, or what have you. And so actually, I think this kind of makes sense that we'd be able, in this different context, not technology focused, to think about there are things that are intrinsic, extraneous, and germane. And then we can try to do the same things as we talked about before, right? So that we have teams focusing more on the germane part. And maybe, I know, again, I'm just coming up with invented ideas, but maybe to minimize intrinsic cognitive load for this team, maybe that means sometimes we need to get some financial advice from another company if there are some new tax breaks or something like that, or maybe if we're entering a new market and recruiting people in a new geography, maybe we need a local accountant to help us with that, understand the tax rules in those countries. Whatever it is, maybe there are things that can help minimize intrinsic cognitive load. An extraneous cognitive load, maybe it's quite painful to submit and to generate the tax forms. Definitely in some countries can be quite bureaucratic and painful to do that. So maybe that takes a lot of time of the accounting team. Maybe even we can think about a digital solution, some sort of platform service that helps generate these tax forms in a more automated fashion and submit them more in an easier way. So I definitely think there are ways we can think in the same way about how do we minimize this aspects of cognitive load. And so going back to Capra's organization, so some of the platform teams that they mention are quite interesting to me, because when I talk about, for example, team strategy, team economy, team sales, so it's an interesting way to think about strategy, right? Not as you were pointing out before. You used to look at it as kind of a top-down thing, right? Where someone's going to set the strategy for the whole company, and now you're thinking about it more as a supporting sort of platform team, helping teams understand what should their focus be, and what should they be looking at in terms of I guess what products to develop, well, in your case you're not developing products, but in general, but what services to focus on and things like this, and what is the strategy, and helping teams understand if they are aligned with the strategy for the organization. So it's a quite important mindset change. And from all I put here, I used some of the text you had that in diagram for these teams. So I think you have currently a mix where some things sound more platform-like and some sound more enabling, some sound more like doing some execution. And that's fine, because you haven't done this for very long. And again, it's a journey where you're going to evolve, understand more clearly what are the goals of different teams. But these ones are interesting because you said part of team strategy's goal is to make sure everyone knows, what you're trying to achieve, which all the goats know which peak you're going to climb. I think that's a nice way to phrase it. What are we trying to achieve as an organization? Make sure everyone understands, if they're aligned or not. Team economy, saying teams receive support to make wise financial decisions. So it's not about making the decisions for them. It's about supporting them, providing the knowledge and maybe some tooling. I don't know, but I could see that happening as well. And team sales, you have the part of the role of the team sales in platform sense is tender materials, sales cases, templates, etc. So helping teams who are actually doing the selling, who are actually trying to get more business with customers, having the tools and the necessary means to do that effectively, which it's kind of similar. We talk about a design platform, for example, if you think about it, where we might have a set of assets around design and usability and templates and branding, etc., for our product teams to use, right? So they are more autonomous and they can do that more autonomously. So I think it's a similar parallel to your sales teams. So I think in this sense, it's very much in line with our idea of platform and the idea of these teams are helping others become more autonomous without increasing their cognitive load, right? Providing the necessary knowledge and services to allow that to happen. Some of the questions I would ask here, again, just things to keep in mind that might help you as you go further to understand, are we going in the right direction? Is because you have this team supporting the 3 value streams, right? So when you have teams that are across value stream, how do they identify who are their primary customers? At some point, and probably already, these teams are going to have to prioritize their work, right? So if we don't know who the primary customers are versus kind of secondary customers, it's going to be harder to prioritize, and we're going to have a lot of demand, and it's going to be harder to know what we should focus on. So for example, if I try to give an example with a sales team, the platform sales team, maybe their primary customer sounds like it's probably, you had another team that's doing new sales, right? Doing new deals with customers. So probably that's their primary customer, right? We're helping get more sales for the company. But maybe consultants who are more at the client doing work, maybe they also need help now and then. Maybe they also can tell the client, well, maybe you need some help with this other thing that you don't have, that your teams don't have the skills. So those might be secondary customers. Not that they're not important, but in order for platform teams to be able to prioritize, understand what we should be focusing, it's good to have that understanding. It becomes a bit more difficult when you're supporting multiple value streams. The second question, which I think you've already asked yourself as well, we're saying that platform teams are not executing the work, the customer-facing work, right? So how do we avoid that to happen? And I think, again, it's going to be a journey where you probably have a mix today. Some things maybe even the platform sales team has to do, which maybe ideally would be the teams that are actually with the customers. So it's something that's going to evolve over time, but keeping in mind that ideally the platform teams are only working for internal customers. When you try to have teams that have internal customers, external customers, it becomes even more complicated to prioritize, and typically the internal customers are the ones that get left behind in some situations. And finally, how are you going to assess cognitive load in teams that are not technology based? So we actually have a template for, it's not a template, it's an example questionnaire for technology and digital software delivery teams, which is focused on the engineering experience, right? But for other teams, you need to understand more of their context to be able to ask the right questions or have the right conversations about, are you overloaded in the sales team or in the marketing team? And what do we need to, how can we address that? Is it extraneous cognitive load, intrinsic cognitive load, this kind of conversations? Another part, and I'm probably spending more time than I suppose, but interactions and boundaries also something is quite important. Like I said, it's not just about understanding the types of teams, but the interactions between them. So when we had the call last week, and I hope you don't mind me sharing that, but you said actually to organize this event, you actually had a bit of back and forth with the economy team because it was something new, something you had, and then you had some costs for this that were something new. So, and that's totally fine, right? It means that you've identified we need to do you had to do a sort of discovery for a little bit, some collaboration to understand, what is the kind of business case, I guess, who is going to do this and so on. And so we come back to the interactions, and now you're talking about these interactions across different types of teams and in different sort of domains, not just technology. And so I would say, expect some of these things to feel a bit awkward, and that's normal. You shouldn't see that as a sign that we're doing it wrong. Instead, what we want is to say, okay, we know there's going to be some awkwardness sometimes in interactions between teams, especially at this point in your journey, and so let's use that as a sensing mechanism for evolving, right? So we understand, okay, we thought this was clear that you knew what to do, but you still had a lot of questions, and why is that? Or we wanted to collaborate to understand your needs, but you were just expecting us to execute the work for us. This sort of things are going to happen, and so we want to use that to improve. And the other aspect is make sure teams have a clear interface. So we call it Team API in the book. So people have said that's kind of a geeky term, right, from application programming interface. But it's effectively what is the team interface, so that you help other teams understand how to interact with you by providing an easy way to find out what do we do as a team, what are we responsible for, what are priorities, how do we prefer communication to happen, especially in a remote world, even more important. Do we want people to use Slack or email or some other way? So the questions here that I would ask you, or I would say that might be useful to have in mind is, first of all, is it clear for teams how they're expected to interact with each other? So do they have a sort of team API or some other way in which you make that clear, so you don't so that you don't increase cognitive load of actually on the communication side? So as you make this transformation, also you need to be aware to avoid, maybe in the past some things, what used to be like, okay, I'm going to send an email to HR to ask for something. It shouldn't be now that, okay, now I have to spend 1 hour finding out how to do this because I'm more autonomous, but actually I don't have the right information to find out, and I don't have the clear expectation. How do I do this? I don't know where is some form I have to fill or something I need to do, even if I can sort of self-serve. So think about the employee experience on how they're using this new services that teams might provide, but and make sure the interface is clear. And then the other thing, the second question is, when there is a request for a team, can we identify what are the interaction modes that should happen or might be necessary? And going back to example of this event, you could have different ways where maybe, let's say your economy team, there was an agreement that, teams are allowed to spend up to a certain limit. And so they don't need to ask permission up to a certain limit, and they just do it. Or, what they need to do is fill in an online form, and, it gets processed automatically, and, you get an answer quickly. If it's something that, these are examples where we already know how to deal with this sort of request, right? So it's a kind of access as a service versus what actually happened in your case, where this is something new. We haven't done this before, so we actually need to collaborate a little bit. So for the requests that the team gets, can we identify, is this something access as a service, or is collaboration needed, or maybe facilitating needed? Actually, the other team should be able to do it by themselves, but what they don't have is the skills to know how to do it. And the last question is, are the boundaries that you set between teams, helping other teams be more autonomous, right? Because promoting ownership and autonomy inside your team is obviously great, as what we're talking about, but we need to be careful, because sometimes the boundaries that we set between different teams' responsibilities can create bottlenecks. Again, if we go back to more of kind of request-based, and we're setting a boundary where actually it should be the other team should have autonomy to do these things instead of being under our control. And so there's a balance there where maybe we feel more ownership that we own these things, but are we thinking about, is this helping other teams become more autonomous? And so the last one, I'll be quick. How do we deal with team topologies for consulting services where you have consultants at clients, or in your case, sometimes even other companies do project-based work for customers, right? And here I have a lot of questions as well. I don't have. I think it's something I've had this sort of question asked before, and the team topology is focused on organizations that are developing their own products and services, right? I think some of the ideas can be applied, but there are a lot of questions, right? How can we be team first and focus on teams if our consultants, our employees are working at the client, right, outside the organization? We can try to apply the same principles at the client, right? So their teams are team first and mindful of cognitive load and all these things, but we might not have kind of the influence enough to do that always. And how do we minimize cognitive load without saying no to customers? Probably another issue for this sort of consulting work. And maybe we need internally to have in the company to have some, for example, communities of practice can help to some extent by kind of thinking ahead of what are the things we should be focusing on and what are the competencies that we should be developing in people. But often it's kind of a sort of diffuse knowledge sharing because we don't know exactly what the next clients are going to need, next customers. But we can kind of try to build the competencies in our consultancies in general. And the last one, which competencies should we develop? Which ones should we specialize? And again, it depends to the markets, how customers, what kind of needs they're going to have. Now there's more market for, let's say, machine learning versus infrastructure help. I don't know. These things evolve over time. So I don't have the answers, but I think this might be some useful questions to think about internally and how do we deal with these things. And I think, from what I've seen, I think that's what you're trying to do at Capra as well. And you have a value stream focused on building competencies and basically adapting to the market as it changes. That's it. I'm sorry I took longer than expected, but I'm happy to answer questions and stay a bit longer.
Thank you very much, Manuel. Those were very relevant, and we're running short on time, but we have gathered all the questions from the chat, and the ones we did not manage to cover will be answered later and sent to everyone attending along with the presentation material. I think we will at least ask one question before we call today, and the question is to Manuel. The question is, what are the flaws of team topologies, and when will it not work or be detrimental or tending to cause harm from your perspective? I could post the question in the chat here as well, so you can see it.
So team topology is really focused on fast flow, right? It's focused on being able to quickly respond to new needs and to problems. So it like I said, it's based on our experience with teams delivering digital services and products, and so it's focused on how to help those teams. There are some cases, but more less and less as we see of organizations that don't actually need to go faster because they have cadence that meets the needs of their customers and that works well for them. I've had situations where a company, they felt like, okay, cross-functional teams would be ideal, but we are small, and so actually it's for us at the moment, because we almost feel like we can work well together almost as a one big team. This typically works up to 30, 40 people. We don't feel the need to actually have this cross-functional teams. We need teams that have multiple skills, but not end to end. We have some UX experts and so on. And so there are some cases where you might not necessarily need to apply these ideas, but what we see is the vast majority of organizations are trying to adapt faster, respond faster, move faster in all industries, even banking, healthcare. We get requests from organizations in those areas as well. But definitely do not apply the ideas kind of blindly just because fortunately the book has become popular, but that should not be the reason why we're applying, is because what are we trying to achieve? It's just that in general, fast flow and fast response to customers is now primordial, and most organizations need that.
Perfect, thank you. I think we'll just sneak in one more question here from the chat. So let's say you have a team that needs a certain skill, but perhaps only for like 20% of a normal weekly time. And this skill is crucial to the team. So do you then think, have you thought about whether this person then who's working for maybe 20% should be part of the team, or how would they be part of the team in that case?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's quite frequent as well. So in general, these cross-functional teams, you'll tend to have T-shaped people where you might have someone like that who is specialized in one area, maybe, I don't know, test automation or something like that. But they also have a working knowledge of other areas, so that they're not just waiting for those 20%, and avoiding to kind of share people between different teams. That's causes issues around, team, the team gelling and the team trusting this person who is not always in the team. And so from a human perspective, it's quite difficult. So the idea and the idea of having enabling teams in particular is to help. It's not that all the teams are going to become experts at UX and testing and everything, but that they have a working knowledge. So for the 80% or 90% of the work they need to do, they have the knowledge. And inside the team, then you might have some people who are more experts, for example, front end versus back end, but you need the team as a whole. So when you start looking at the team as the unit of delivery, then that unit needs to have those competences, and not ideally not depend on one single person inside the team that's the only one who knows how to provision infrastructure or do a deployment. So there has to be some sharing of knowledge inside the team as well.
Perfect. Thank you very much. So finally today, I just want to thank Manuel once again for taking the time and coming to us here. And I think everyone has learned a lot, and it was a pleasure to meet you, even though it was remotely for now. So hopefully we'll meet you in person.
A lot, so.
Yeah, thank you. And also want to thank everyone for coming, both from Capra and also from our guests from other companies. Don't hesitate to contact us if you have any more questions, or if you want to learn more about Capra or our consultants. And then, as Gustav mentioned, we will try to follow up the questions on email after the event, and also send the slides and the recording. So once again, thank you very much, everyone, for coming, and have a great day. Goodbye.